What will we be learning during our study of Deuteronomy? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we begin our study of the book of Deuteronomy on Walking Through the Bible. In today's lesson, we return again to the Old Testament and begin the 9th study of our Walk Through the Bible, a study of the book of Deuteronomy. All told, it will take us 109 lessons to cover this book, with the teaching of each lesson being between 5 to 8 minutes in length. We hope you'll join us for each lesson of this study. Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the Old Testament and is also the 5th and final book referred to in the section of the Old Testament known as the Books of the Law. The book itself continues the historical narrative where we left off in the book of Numbers, with the children of Israel in the plains of Moab just before being led into the Promised Land. The name Deuteronomy, which is translated in English from the Greek Septuagint's title of the book, Deuteronomion tuto, means second law. We should not conclude that the book of Deuteronomy contains a second law given to Israel, in other words, a new law, but a copy or repetition of the law of Moses as presented in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. Yes, we will find some laws that we haven't covered before, such as divorce laws, but most of the laws covered in this book we have studied before in our Old Testament series. As to the author, Deuteronomy 1:1 states that these are the words of Moses, meaning that the main author of the book is Moses. This is confirmed in other books of the Old Testament like Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. It is also confirmed by Jesus himself in Matthew 19:7 and 8 and Mark 7 verse 10. However, we said that Moses is the main author because we know that he didn't write the final chapter due to the fact that it contains his death. This would have been added by a later writer. With this book being set just before the death of Moses and just before Israel enters Canaan, that dates the book to have been written around 1406 BC and completed after Israel takes the Promised Land, since that detail would have been added later. As for what the book is trying to teach, we could come up with 3 main points. First, the beginning of the book provides Israel a quick review of their history from Mount Sinai to the plains of Moab. This takes place in the first 4 chapters. In chapter 5, we have this section concluding with the renewal of God's covenant with Israel concerning the land of Canaan itself. So the first purpose is one of history. The second purpose is one of doctrine. The book will teach that God is the one who provided Israel with all the instructions they needed in order to live as his people in the land that he was giving them. This, of course, was accomplished through a retelling of the law. Sometimes mankind thinks that God expects too much of us, or he didn't give us enough information in order to serve him. With Israel, we find that that was absolutely not the case, and it isn't the case with us today. If the people followed the law that God gave them, and offered the sacrifices required when they sinned, God would be pleased with them, and they would prosper. However, if they went after other gods and served them, God would punish them, as we will see in the book of Judges. But Israel couldn't blame God for their disobedience, for he gave them everything they needed. But of course, the law itself would expose Israel to their sins and the sacrifices they were commanded to offer, even though they had to offer them, couldn't remit their sins. They needed a better sacrifice. And of course, that brings us to the third purpose, which is the promise of the Messiah, a Savior. Back in our study of Genesis, we saw in the Garden of Eden the first promise of a Savior, even if that promise was vague. The promise was made a little clearer during Abraham's day, in that we learned that the Messiah would be of the seed of Abraham, and then through Isaac and Jacob. But from Exodus through Numbers, we really didn't see many direct references to the Messiah, even though Jesus clearly referred to these texts in his teachings. In Deuteronomy, though, we're going to get the most direct prophecy of Christ thus far in the Old Testament, found in Deuteronomy 18:15-19. It is there that we learn that the Christ would be a great prophet like unto Moses, and all Israel would need to hear and obey his words. Yes, the Christ isn't identified by tribe or by name, but by character, like unto Moses. Moses was a prophet, a deliverer, and a mediator for Israel. Christ the Messiah would be all those things and more, but not only for Israel, but for all mankind. As to how the book is organized, if we pay attention to detail, it follows the form of many ancient covenant texts found in other cultures of that day. It begins with a preamble in the first 5 verses, then moves on to a historical prologue through chapter 4, then stipulations of the treaty in chapters 5 through 26, then curses and blessings associated with either obeying or disobeying the covenant, and then finishing with the continuation of the covenant through the arranging of public readings of the text. Thus, in comparison with other cultures of the time period, Deuteronomy can be viewed as God, as a great king, having implemented a covenant with Israel, thereby causing Israel's future success to be dependent on obeying the stipulations found in the covenant. That this book should follow a similar format as other cultures at that time shouldn't surprise us or even alarm us, for when we look at writings today, how things are written is certainly reflected by the culture in which we live. And even though God is the one who inspired the book, he didn't divorce the book from the cultural norms of the day, for how else would it be properly understood by the people who read it? Thus, to us today, even though this book is not our law to follow, it is crucial for us to study, for it will show us the uniqueness and unity of God, the love between God and his people, the prohibition by God of idolatry, the need to live as holy people, the rewards of obedience and punishments for rebellion, and the need to remember and retain the truth of God. These lessons transcend this book and are absolutely applicable to the Christian today. Overall, then, this will be an interesting study, one that I hope you'll join us for. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 1 to 8, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.